Grab a seat. Love that. I think one of the things that we often do as humans, especially fallen humans, that know we're sinful, is we hide, right? There's many ways of hiding. You see that right off the first pages of the Bible. We see man hiding from God once sin becomes enmeshed into our reality. One of the ways that we hide is in crowds. One of the ways that we hide is we hide in crowds. We place ourselves among many, and we hope that maybe there we will not have to really truly interact with certain truths that maybe we aren't sure what to deal with or how to deal with. I think in our text this morning, John 7, I think one of the key words that the author, John, is trying to get us to cue in on is this word muttering. Okay, muttering. It comes up many times in our text. It's the same Greek word, actually, that was used back in chapter 6, chapter 6, to refer to the crowd, and it was there translated grumbling. It's supposed to remind you of a particular instance in the history of Israel, God's covenant people, and that was the season when they were wandering out in Sinai, and as much as God was trying to reach out to them, as much as God was trying to lead them, speak to them, provide for them, there was constant muttering going on. I think this word muttering, grumbling, however you want to translate it, I think it's supposed to, for us, embody this kind of disposition of hard-hearted indifference that rather than actually interact with truth, sort of sits back and hides in the snark of the crowd, mumbling and muttering, hoping that maybe in that safe, murky place, you won't actually have to deal with the truth. When I was a kid, I would do this oftentimes when I thought something was, if I didn't want to look uncool, you're a youth group or something, and you're with your friends, and you're in the back, and somebody's saying something from the front, and you're just kind of like, just kind of muttering, like, oh, I'm just so cool, I got things to say. And what you're communicating with your body language, it's you guys right here. Yeah, it's you. No, I'm just kidding. So true, though, right? Anybody? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, your muttering is encouraging sometimes. Most of the time it's encouraging. It's like, I'm above this, right? Like, I'm above this, and I'm not really, I was just kind of doing my thing. It's kind of like a lack of confidence on what you really think. When I was a kid, I was a notorious mumbler, right? And I would get called out for it all the time. I had a friend that called me Mumbleina, because I just wouldn't say anything clear, or I'd start kind of loud, and then I kind of trail off. What, Sam? Can you speak up? You mumble, and I look back on that, and I think it was because I was unconfident. I was not very confident on what I was saying. I just kind of assumed whatever I had to say, nobody was interested in, and so there was kind of this mumbling there. I think all of these thoughts kind of embody what John is trying to get you to see with the disposition of this crowd that Jesus is interacting with. It's kind of this indecisive groupthink, the spirit of unbelief that's just kind of working its way throughout the crowd. And here's what Jesus does in teaching. Here's what I love the way Jesus teaches and interacts. He doesn't let people hide, and he doesn't let people be indecisive. He draws them out, ever so uncomfortably oftentimes, draws them out into a place where they are forced to show what they really want and what they really think. He's doing this with this crowd. He does this with individuals. He does it with Nicodemus. He does it with the woman at the well. He's constantly drawing people out so that they can make a decision. Now, take note of this. Jesus' goal in teaching was not to make it easy. It was to make it clear to them what they actually think. And the preaching of Jesus, the message of Jesus, was so cumbersome to those who really hadn't taken hold of it that it just kind of stripped their gears. It kind of just like short-circuited their thinking. Here's what I think it was like. It's like if you're holding 7 or 8 very fragile pieces of china or plates, and they're very dear to you, they're your great-great-grandma's or whatever, and you're holding them and you're balancing them, and then somebody comes along and they say, hey, I want you to take one more thing. You go, okay, can you just fit it right there? You just like kind of tuck it right under my armpit? Maybe I can hold on to it. That's not what Jesus does when he comes preaching. Jesus comes bringing a kingdom that is so massive. It's got its own source of gravity. He brings a kingdom, a message of a kingdom that is so powerful, so provocative, so polarizing that the only way you can grab it is to literally drop everything in your hands and get your arms all the way around it. And it puts you in this situation where you have to decide. But I love the things that I'm holding. I love my life. I love my family. I love the joy. And God's like, that's great. But if you aren't ready to drop those things and take a hold of me, then you've made your decision. It's either drop him or drop the things that you're holding. Jesus' teaching is like a pebble in the shoe. You can't ignore it. You can for a little while, but after a while it starts to create friction and a blister, and at some point you got to stop and you got to make a decision with Jesus. Am I going to kick him out of my shoe, or am I going to make him the cornerstone of my entire reality? Because it's one or the other. You're going to crucify him, or you're going to make him king, or acknowledge that he's king. Those are the options when it comes to Jesus. His teaching doesn't let you do anything else. And if anybody else tries to tell you that Jesus just lets you kind of make him a little addition to your cluttered life of loves, then they're not reading their Bibles. They're not really interacting with what Jesus said. He did not come with a kingdom that could be easily compartmentalized into our junk drawer of things to put him alongside. It's no accident that the Old Testament and the New Testament authors refer to Jesus as a stumbling stone. A stumbling stone, something you trip over, something that's frustrating to you unless you find the use for it. In fact, the metaphor is used of Jesus being the chief cornerstone that was rejected, kicked to the side. They didn't want to build Judaism. They didn't want to build God's people on the stone of Jesus. They kicked him to the side, and people just trip over him and trip over him and trip over him. But it turns out that stone that trips people is the foundation stone of ultimate reality and eternal reality. So we have to decide, are we going to trip over Jesus, or are we going to trust in Jesus? That's the options. Today, I think John, the author, he gives us the topography of all of these different people and how they're viewing Jesus, what they're thinking of him, what they're saying about him, and it's in the muttering. And from the distance, it just sounds like a beehive, or just sounds like there's buzzing in Jerusalem. But as you get closer, you start to hear, oh, this person thinks he's a prophet. This person thinks he's a teacher. This person thinks he's Messiah. This person thinks he's a lunatic. This person thinks he's dangerous. That's the muttering that's going on in Jerusalem, and John's trying to capture that, and Jesus is trying to cut through that. And he's trying to call disciples to respond to this message of the kingdom with faith and trust. So with that as a backdrop, we're going to dive into the text, and let me just tell you how we're going to come at this. It's a fairly large passage, so we're going to move quickly. And as we move through it, I'm going to give you 6 ways to trip instead of trust in Jesus. 6 ways to trip instead of trust in Jesus. There are timeless trip hazards when it comes to dealing with the person of Jesus. Timeless meaning it wasn't only hard for the first century audience, who we so constantly consider as we read the Bible. It was also and is also hard for our present, current day audience as well. There are trip hazards. If we're not careful, we will trip over Jesus rather than trust him. Let's start in verse 11. Let me get you back into the context here a little bit. If you remember, Jesus has kind of come to the close of what is called his Galilean ministry. So Israel very much split into 2 major areas, north and south. And the north was Galilee. It was kind of the backwaters of Israel. It was kind of the hick town area where Jesus grew up. You have cities there along the Galilee, like Capernaum and Caesarea, and all these places that Jesus spent a lot of time doing miracles and preaching. Well, he's come to the end of that season here in John 7, and now he's transitioning to what's called his Judean ministry. It's where he does things now in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, is the epicenter of Judaism, right? It is the main stage of what God is doing in Israel and has done in Israel. It's where the prophets would come before they were killed. It's where the temple was. It's where the Sanhedrin, the great council, the elders of elders, the 70 that makes all the big decisions, where they were. It's where the feasts were held. And so the camera turns in chapter 7 to Jerusalem. Now, we had a really interesting text last week where before Jesus goes up to the Feast of Booths, which is happening here, this mega feast that would happen once a year, Jesus has this interesting dialogue with his brothers, which is a really unique kind of a moment because you get to see some of the dynamics between him and his biological half-brothers. And you see clearly that they were not people of faith. They hadn't trusted him yet. And so they're trying to kind of, I don't know exactly what they were trying to do, but whatever they were trying to do, it wasn't helpful. Hey, Jesus, why don't you go and get on the main stage and show everybody who you are and show them what you can do? Like, let's get this thing going, Messiah, right? You can kind of feel the dripping snark and sarcasm in the way that the brothers are trying to encourage Jesus to go up, and he just has nothing to do with it. He just says, no, I'm not going to do it. You guys go up. I got other things going on that you don't even understand. So they go up to the feast, and Jesus, of course, goes in the back door. He goes kind of undercover. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of people. All the pilgrims have traveled. The people from Galilee have come into Jerusalem. It's kind of a tinderbox, as it often would be during the feasts, of different people coming in for different purposes. And here we find in verse 11, the Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, where is he? I just want to draw your attention to that really quick, because Jesus at this point is fever pitch in terms of his popularity and the intrigue. He's done some miracles that have really elevated his status, the way people are looking at him. And they've been anticipating him coming to this feast and teaching and maybe doing a miracle. So much so that he's kind of the mainline event. He's the keynote speaker, if you will, that they don't know if he's coming. They're hoping he does because they want to see what he's going to do. And of course, he doesn't immediately until the middle of the feast, but everybody's looking for him. And I want to make a point really quick on that, and that is that, Jesus is a prolific person for every generation. Isn't it interesting? They're looking for him, and so has every human for 2,000 years. Everybody's interested in Jesus. Even if you have no interest in making him out to be Messiah or acknowledging that he's God, everybody's interested in Jesus. Isn't that interesting? He is one of the most interesting, intriguing, polarizing figures that's ever lived. Probably the single most important figure in Western culture, particularly in the last 2,000 years. I mean, everybody's looking for Jesus. The question is, what are they looking to do with him? What are they looking for him for? What do they want to see him for? Verse 12, there was much, note it, muttering about him among the people. So again, we have this kind of spirit of indecision. This kind of disconfident, passive mumbling that's happening in the crowds about Jesus, who he is, what he's doing. John wants us to key into that. Now John's going to show us the division that's happening here. While some said, he's a good man. Others said, no, he is leading the people astray. Yet for the fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. Now, we don't have time to go there, but later in the chapter, John extrapolates even more on the division that's happening about Jesus. He says some people thought he was a prophet. Some people thought he was Messiah. Some people thought he was, just a good person. I mean, there's so much diversity in the different ways people are viewing him. And nothing's changed, right? Nothing's changed. Throw the word Jesus in your search engine. You're going to find a lot of different views about what to do with him, who he was, what he came to do. People today say things like, oh, he was a good man, or he was a good example. I think a lot of people would relegate him to just sort of being somebody that did some good things that we can learn from. Some would say he's a prophet. Some would say he's a prolific figure. Some would say he was a man who became God. You ever heard of that cult? He was a man who God elevated to be a God, right? Some people say that about him incorrectly. Some, along with myself, say he was God who became man. Never ceasing to be God, of course, adding his humanity to his divinity. Some would say he was a man made into a God by the words of man. You ever heard that one? He was just a good man, and then his followers were like, let's make him a God. Okay? That's a hard one to honestly hold because it doesn't really make sense with the Bible. Some people think he was a madman. Some people think he's a dangerous man. Some people think he was a deceptive man. Regardless of what you think, there's a lot of muttering in our culture about what to do with Jesus. Right? A lot of muttering. I want you to notice one more thing here before we keep moving, and that is that part of the reason they're muttering is because they're afraid. You see that in verse 13? Who are they afraid of? It says the Jews, but it's implying the Jewish leadership. It's implying the powers that be, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those that have already marked Jesus as an enemy of the state, if you will, and are already plotting and scheming to murder him. So in verse 13, we realize that these guys are kind of being muzzled from having a really robust conversation because they're afraid of being canceled. Right? This is cancel culture. It's nothing new. Except in this day, they'd stone you. They wouldn't just, cancel your Instagram account or whatever. So cancel culture is not a new thing. I just want to say, by the way, don't ever assume that your culture is not playing a significant role in the way that you talk and think about Jesus. Don't be so ignorant as to think that. Oh, I'm not influenced by culture when I think of it. Yes, you are. We all are. So much of our muttering and mumbling is because we are afraid of what people might think or say when we actually have a real dialogue with Jesus and his teaching. So here we come to our first way to trip over Jesus. If you guys have the handout, you want to fill this in. Number one, the first way to trip over Jesus is to mistake muttering for listening. Mistake muttering for listening. Here we see the crowd is attempting to discern the identity of Jesus, but they're doing so by talking about him rather than actually coming to him, see? And this, I think, is really a trap today for us as well. I think there's a lot of people in our day that trip over Jesus, assuming that because they're having a conversation about him, that therefore they've actually interacted with him. You know, spirituality has never been more in style. Have you noticed that? It's funny, as a pastor, you know, I run into people that I don't know, and I talk to them, and as soon as they find out I'm a pastor, the conversation gets really interesting. And oftentimes when they do find out I'm a pastor, I can tell they feel this social need to try to let me know that they know some things about some spiritual stuff. It's really funny, actually. You know, they kind of like start throwing in some Christianese that's like not correct, so they like start saying things like that. I'm like, you know, it's not in the Bible, right? But I'm not. They probably think I'm judging them. Well, I guess I kind of am. So you know, so they're trying to look spiritual. But here's the thing: it's like when I say I'm a pastor, like the climate right now is not like, he's the pastor, run away. They're like, oh, spirituality, faith, sweet, I can hang with that. Now, if I had brought up like weed, they'd be like, sweet. You know, if I had brought up like anything, they probably could have talked about it. But so for them, I think a lot of people they feel like, hey, I can mutter about that. Want to talk about Jesus? Yeah, I've heard some things about Jesus. I know some things about spirituality, you know. I think the first way to trip over Jesus is to assume that because you're having a dialogue about spirituality and culture, that you have actually interacted with the raw teachings of Jesus himself. And I don't just mean what someone says about him, the characterizations and mischaracterizations of our day. I mean, really looking at his word. So Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, verse 14. About the middle of the feast here, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. I want you to note the word teaching because it's Jesus' teaching that is offensive. You need to understand that. It's not his presence that's offensive. It's his teaching. And you need to see this because a lot of people would like to relegate Jesus to just a symbol. And if you do that, then he's not offensive. If he's just a symbol of warm fuzzies and good vibes, then he's not offensive. But Jesus wasn't a symbol. Jesus was a teacher. And what does teaching do? Teaching does what I'm doing right now. It prosecutes points. It makes assertions. And it divides. That's what teaching's supposed to do. This is wrong. This is right. So that's what Jesus did. He taught, and it was his teaching that was offensive, largely because he directed it at the religious hypocrisy of the most powerful people in the city, right? So he's a teacher. Now, verse 15, we start to see the second trip hazard here. The Jews, therefore, notice, they marveled, saying, how is it that this man has learning when he has never studied? So they're impressed with Jesus. Jesus was an impressive guy. He had to have been an impressive guy. Not necessarily physically. I mean, I think he just looked normal. Nobody thought he was impressive until he started his ministry. But he was an impressive guy. And not just because he did miracles. And not just because he was filled with the Holy Spirit. I think Jesus, as a man, was an impressive individual. I think he was very compelling, very intelligent, very articulate, the kind of guy that when he talks, you want to listen. I think that's who Jesus was. And they're impressed with him, and I don't think they're flattering him here. I think they're stunned because they're like, wait a minute, where did he go to school? He didn't go to our school. Did he go to your school? Didn't go to your school. Who did he study? Did he study your rabbi? No, didn't study under my rabbi. As far as they know, Jesus was raised in the backwaters, the channels of unimportance, and they're completely stunned that he is brilliant. They're stunned that he's brilliant. I'll say this, and I'll say it confidently. Jesus was and is and will forever be the most intelligent and informed human being that has ever lived. But a lot of people don't think about him that way, right? I've been reading this book by Dallas Willard, The Divine Conspiracy. He's been challenging me on this, realizing, when you think about who's the smartest person in history, your mind doesn't go to Jesus. It goes to Albert Einstein or something like that. Right? Oh, yeah, these are smart. Jesus wasn't smart. He was spiritual. Really? Jesus was just spiritual? He just kind of walked around saying pithy little phrases, and he was brilliant. He's the rabbi of rabbis, teacher of teachers, let alone the fact that he was literally discipled by God the Father and filled with the Holy Spirit just at a human level. He's brilliant. He's brilliant, and he deserves your discipleship. Here's the thing. Here's number 2. Write it in. The second way to trip over Jesus is to expect Jesus to sound like your society. Expect him to sound like your society and have gone to your schools. They're tripping over Jesus because he didn't come through their channels of education. And I would suggest to you that's exactly why he was qualified to save them from their misguided education. You understand that Jesus came into a religious system that we can call Judaism that was in complete apostasy. Okay? There were some faithful Jews, but the system of religion that Jesus came into was completely corrupt because the leaders had so deeply twisted their own man-centered purposes into the doctrine. And Jesus is like, I came to save you from your thinking, and you think I should be educated under your thinking? Absolutely not. There is a trip hazard here that I want you to see under 2, and that is that oftentimes people in modern culture, they think that because Jesus lived a long time ago, that therefore he has nothing to teach us. There's a name for this, okay? You can write it down. It's called chronological snobbery, okay? I didn't make that up. It's a thing, chronological snobbery. It's where you think because someone didn't live through the Enlightenment or live through the age of technology, that somehow they don't know anything. And people do this with Jesus. They're like, well, for his day, he had some insights. But, now we have Google. And we're way smarter now, right, than anybody was. Aren't we? No, we're not. We're not. Okay, don't discredit Jesus as stumbling block. Don't discredit him because he lived a long time ago. I think in some ways we're actually less intelligent now, in many ways, because we are over-depending on technology. It's chronological snobbery. Here's what a lot of people do. They trip over Jesus by reducing him to a pithy, pre-intellectual personification of goodwill, like Santa Claus. So they think about Jesus. Oh yeah, he was like Mother Teresa, just a good person. He was much more than that. He was much more than that. He came bringing ultimate reality into a fallen and twisted world. You know what's crazy is when your entire existence is corrupt and all of your thinking is corrupt, that someone comes from another reality, another dimension, you think that they're insane. Imagine a doctor from today going back 2,000 years and trying to explain some things, right? Hey, you probably shouldn't bleed people with leeches. Maybe that's not, yeah. Hey, there's this thing called germs. They kill people. I don't think they really knew about that stuff back then, right? They'd be like, you're insane. You're insane. They would think you're insane, right? Jesus is literally coming from another dimension. He has God the Father as his instructor, and he's bringing uncorrupted, untwisted, ultimate truth. And they're looking at him like, but you didn't go to our schools. And Jesus is going, I know. If I went to your schools, I couldn't save you because I would have been deformed by you, indoctrinated by you. You know that Jesus did not come to conform to our thinking. He came to conform us to his. Romans 12:2, to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And what this means is that we should expect Jesus to short-circuit our preconceived notions when we come to him. If he's not offending you, you're probably not reading your Bible right. If everything Jesus says just fits so nicely with your modern Western sensibilities, I doubt you're really reading the Bible. Now, Jesus responds to their astonishment here in verse 16. So Jesus answered them, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Okay? In other words, the reason you're impressed is because God the Father has literally taught me these things. Now, don't read that and assume that Jesus wasn't also well-read. He was. He was well-read, and he probably understood not just Judaism, he probably understood a lot of the Greek thinking, which was so permeant in the culture. He probably understood a lot of the polytheistic, all the different religions of the day and the cultures. I guarantee Jesus knew these things. Verse 17, if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking on my own authority. In other words, if you're really interested in the truth, then the truth will stand out to you. It will bear resonance in you. Verse 18, the one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. I think Jesus is kind of taking a jab there a little bit at the teachings of the day by saying, the reason that your teaching is so off is because it's centered on man's glory. And there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of false doctrine that has been created for man's glory, and it needs to be ripped off. I think I've told you this before, but when I was a kid, I worked for my daddy at a woodworking business, and we would use a lot of wood glue, and you'd use this little glue pot. And you'd dip the brush in the glue pot, and you'd wipe it on the side, and then you'd put the glue on the thing. And over time, there'd be layer and layer and layer and layer of glue until the thing was so swollen that you couldn't fit the brush in there anymore. So that was my favorite, because then I come along and I get to just rip all the glue layers off. It sounds just like that, Just rip all the glue layers off. This is what Jesus is doing. He's coming into a system of religion that has been so altered and augmented from what God originally invented it to be, that it's almost indistinguishable from truth. And so he's literally going, guys, all your teachings are centered on man. I'm not here for man's glory. I'm here for my glory, or for God's glory. And that's why I can speak the truth to you. Verse 19, has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. To which they'd be like, what are you talking about? The law's our thing. That's what we do. We're law keepers. And he's going, no, you're not law keepers. Now, other places in the New Testament, Jesus explains what he's talking about there, and you can go look at those. He says, why do you seek to kill me? The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? They're looking around. Is somebody trying to kill him right now? Why does he think we're trying to kill him? Now, I don't know if this is like people pretending to be ignorant, or if this is just some of the people there that didn't really know the scheming of the leaders yet, and they are ignorant. I don't know, but regardless, it's more muttering. They're not really dealing in reality. Who's trying to kill you? What are you talking about? We're talking about killing you. One thing, though, I think is certain is that Jesus is saying what he knows they're going to do. Now, whether they even know that they're going to do it or not yet, Jesus already knows they're going to do it. Because, listen to me, muttering always leads to murdering. Okay? And by murdering, I mean silencing the voice of Christ. Verse 21, Jesus answered them. Now, I want you to see that he doesn't really respond to their statement about not understanding him being killed. He just goes right on to what he wants to talk about. Jesus answered them, I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Okay, what's he talking about? What's the one work he's referring back to? This is why we read the Bible in context. Okay, remember, John chapter 5, this is the last thing Jesus did in Jerusalem. He healed a paralytic by a pool. Remember it? Pool of Bethesda. He did it, and it really ticked off the leaders. Why did it tick them off? Anybody? It was on the Sabbath. It was on the Sabbath because they saw this, according to their interpretations and traditions, they saw that Jesus was working on the Sabbath. So they had a really hard time with that, and he was carrying his bed. So they're all perturbed about that. So Jesus is bringing us back to that. You got to remember that the Bible was meant to really be read in one setting. Or these books were meant to be read in one setting. They weren't necessarily meant to be read like we do, where we take a little bit at a time. In a lot of ways, John's assuming you're sitting down and reading this whole narrative. So he knows in your head, you're very aware of what this instance Jesus is bringing up is. He says, I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Now follow Jesus' logic. Moses gave you circumcision. Not that it is from Moses, because it was before him, but from the fathers. You circumcise a man on the Sabbath. Now, let me explain what he's bringing up here. He's bringing up a seeming contradiction. Because what happens is when you have competing laws that seem to contradict one another, it forces you to make a value-based decision. So we've got two laws. One is the Sabbath law, don't work on the Sabbath. Now, of course, you got to interpret that the way you think you interpret it. And then you got this other law, which is to circumcise the males of Israel on the 8th day. Circumcision is this sign that they belong to the covenant community of God. And the Sabbath is also a sign. But what happens is every so often, a baby is born in such a way where they got to get circumcised on the 8th day. What are we going to do? So which rule do we break? We break the Sabbath rule, Or do we break the circumcision on the 8th day rule? So they're forced into a value-based decision. Well, what did they choose? Well, they obviously chose the circumcision as the prior, or as the more important commandment to follow. And Jesus doesn't get on their case about that. He's fine with that. But he brings it up. Why? Because he wants to make a point. Here's the point in verse 23. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So he's saying you can see that circumcision is so important that it's worth not following meticulously Sabbath law because it's so important. What you can't see is that Jesus sees healing a person as the most important thing, much more important than following the microethical restrictive guidelines of the Sabbath as written in, section 3, subsection 4, CB2. He's like, you're so freaked out that I healed on the Sabbath, and you're missing the fact that I made somebody whole. Now, here's where we find trip hazard 3. Trip hazard 3, write it in. Third way to trip over Jesus is to domesticate Jesus within the cage of your man-made rules. To domesticate Jesus within the cage of your man-made rules. They think they can write Jesus off because he did not toe their line, which was not God's line, it was their line, okay? Now, here's how I think this maps on to today. Here's how I think this has context today. I think today there are so many people that write Jesus off because they don't like the way that he's making things whole. They're okay with Jesus being a good person. They're okay with Jesus being maybe even a sacrifice for their sins. Okay, but this idea of Jesus being Lord of all, they're like, yeah, but I don't like all the things he did. And I don't like the Bible that he's in. And I don't like the church that claims him. And I don't like the Old Testament God because he seems like a jerk. And so I just don't know about all that. Can we do that? Can we do that? Here's what I put in that same line. Read it in your notes. I said, he did not come to manage your behavior, but to be your only path to life. Here's what you need to realize about the gospel. The gospel is not the news that Jesus came in to give us more rules. The gospel is Jesus came in to rescue us from death. And you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? So he's like, sorry, I disturbed your social senses by healing on the Sabbath. I just made a man whole. And this is exactly what our culture does, isn't it? I don't like Jesus because he didn't come in and preach against slavery. Well, I didn't like Jesus because he didn't come in and fight and champion for the equality of women. Okay, I'll tell you what, in Jesus' kingdom, I guarantee you there will be no slavery, there will be no inequality, or any of the things that God is not okay with. But Jesus didn't come in to straighten out social culture. Jesus came in to die and be raised to rescue the perishing and bring them to life. So good grief, what do we expect here, right? There's an illustration I saw a couple of years ago, and I just forgot to use it. It's so good. You guys remember back in 2018, there was a flood in Thailand, and there was a large number of students, young students, that were exploring this cave. They were way back in it. They were 2.5 miles back into this cave. And this monsoon or whatever came, and it flooded the cave. And these kids were stuck in the very back of this cave. You guys remember that? Okay. There was this crazy story. You can, there's documentaries and movies about it. Really good. So it put them in this really hard situation where they had to figure out how to they had to figure out first if these kids were even alive. And so they're sending Navy SEALs and the best trained people they have in there, and they can't get back to them. And finally, these old kind of overweight white divers from, Europe or whatever, they come in and they actually get back to them. They get to the kids, they discover they're alive, and it's like an amazing moment. But then the drama just begins to start because they realize, well, we found them, but how in the world are we going to get these guys out? I mean, it took them literally 3.5 hours to dive back into the cave to the point where they were. And they barely got in them themselves, and they're professional divers. How are they going to get a couple dozen or whatever it is, young kids out? I mean, if they try to put masks on them and swim them out, they're going to freak out. They're going to rip their masks off. They're going to end up killing everybody. Talk about a dilemma, right? And of course, the ethics, right, of the whole, we can't do this. This is wrong. Okay, well, what's the options? Either we take a risk or they all die. That's the options. So Jesus, he comes into this world in such a similar way. You know, we don't realize just how serious sin is, the disease of sin, the evil that has so enmeshed itself in the domain that we live in is so bad. You understand that Jesus came in to rescue you from that and will do whatever is necessary. Now, you know the story, maybe you don't. If you don't, you should look it up. What they decided to do is they decided to put the kids to sleep without telling them that they were going to do it, to tape a mask over their head and swim them out for 3.5 hours, one at a time, giving them top-offs for the anesthesia as they go. Talk about controversial. And I don't think they let the news know they were going to do it because they knew they'd have a field day. They just did it. And you talk about the stress for these divers. If it works out, they're heroes. If it doesn't, they might go to jail. Who knows, right? I mean, this is the reality of salvation in a dangerous situation. Jesus has come into a world that is hostile, that is ultimately in rejection of him, and he is trying to pull his people out. And that means he's going to do some things that we maybe don't like because he's responding to evil in order to save us from it. I'm so glad that Jesus knocked me out and swam me out of the cave. Can I get a witness? I was like the most white thing I've ever said. Can I get a 25, pardon me. Some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said, "Is not this the man whom they seek to kill?" Now they're putting 2 and 2 together. Hey, wait a minute. You know, by the way, it's chapter 7, and they've already hatched a plan. They're already talking about how to kill Jesus. Pretty crazy, right? And here he is, they say, verse 26, speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Christ? So, you know, the general population, they're confused by the response of the Pharisees. The Pharisees had immediately kind of earmarked him as bad, and then all of a sudden Jesus is here teaching, and they're not interacting with him. They're not confronting him. So they're thinking, well, maybe the Pharisees figured something out. Maybe they know he's the Messiah. Maybe we should, you know, they're kind of almost hoping maybe he is the Messiah. Now, the Pharisees hear this muttering, and that's why they decide to interact and intervene. Quick point here, number 4, fourth stumbling block, fourth way to stumble over Jesus. Look to the religious leaders of your day to confirm Jesus. Here's where I think these guys go wrong. They're spending way too much energy looking over at the Pharisees and the chief priests and the Sadducees to see, are they going to accept him? That's their first mistake. Okay? I think we do the same thing in culture, and I think that the priests of our day are not preachers. They are influencers, and they are the people that are teaching in schools, and they are the people of influence and notoriety in our culture. And what a lot of people are doing in the world, they're tripping over Jesus because they're looking at what Oprah says, or they're looking at whatever some 17-year-old TikToker says, or they're looking, there's anything wrong with it. There might be something wrong with that, but they're looking at the priests of our culture, right? What are they saying? The leaders of the day, the cultural gatekeepers. Let's keep moving. Verse 27, but we know where this man comes from. Now, here's their next issue that they have with Jesus. Not only did he not go to their schools, they know where he grew up. But we know where this man comes from, and when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. So here's their issue. They're condescendingly looking at the fact that Jesus came from the backwoods. Right? And they're like, we're from Jerusalem. This guy's from Nazareth. Who does he think he is? I mean, can he really be the Messiah? And then they throw this out here like it's truth. They say no one will know when the Messiah comes. You know, they say that like it's in the Bible. You know what's funny? It's not. I did some research on that this week. I'm like, does there anyone in the Bible says that when the Messiah shows up, no one will know where he comes from? No. It's folklore. They misinterpreted some passages, the ones that say, well, he'll come to his temple suddenly. They're like, that must mean he's going to appear out of thin air, right? He's just going to show up, boom, right? And Jesus, like, they saw him grow up. They know where he's from. They know his family. They know Joseph, they know Mary. So they're really wrestling with this familiarity of Jesus. Now, here's number 5. Trip hazard number 5, write it in. Assume that the earthy familiarity of Jesus undermines the divine spirituality of Jesus. Say that again. Assume, if you want to trip over Jesus, assume that the earthy, like dirt, familiarity of Jesus undermines the divine spirituality of Jesus. See, they believe that they had mastered Jesus because they knew his hometown. That's why Jesus said, the prophet has no honor in his hometown. See, they were expecting something big, flashy, large, main stage, big lights, big sound system, big splash, big miracles. That's what they're waiting for. Something mysterious and spiritual. And I just suggest to you that that's what most people in our culture are expecting God showing up to look like. They're like, oh, if God's real, he's going to be like a thunderstorm or something, you know. He's going to write in the clouds. It's going to be some mysterious spiritual thing. But in reality, the way that God chooses to come is in human form. Why? Well, there's many reasons. I'll give you one. Because a human is the language, the ultimate language of God towards us. You ever think about that? Why did Jesus need to be a human? There's many reasons doctrinally. One of the most profound for me is that in order for us to be able to see God in a unique way for the first time, God needed to become human so that we could now relate with God forever as a human. Isn't that incredible? What is astounding to me about the gospel is not just that Jesus became glorious, was ascended, resurrected, glorified, but that he could become humble. That to me is the more astounding miracle. The humility of Christ is more impressive to me than the glory of Christ, because the fact that God is glowing makes sense. The fact that God showed up in Nazareth as a baby in the dirt, in a tray, in a feeding trough is scandalizing. You know, our culture likes humility because of Christianity. Understand that? We like humility for the most part. We also like pride. But our culture likes humility. Why? Because we have Christian underpinnings. But in this day, humility wasn't necessary. Like, no one's giving Jesus merit for being poor, even though everybody on Shark Tank wants to talk about how they were poor before they made their money, right? Because in our culture, we're like, yeah, you were rags to riches. That's not the way these people thought. They're like, rags? You're not important. If you were important, you wouldn't have come from rags. Jesus came through the earthy stuff of life, and that is so often where God reveals himself. And the humility, the humble places, the normal places, the dirt. I had this thought this morning. It was kind of fun to think about the fact that Jesus, when he came in the dirt, the dust of the countryside of Nazareth. And it was in the dirt that God formed man in the first place. That God made man from dirt and his spirit together, from glory and earth. Jesus comes as glory in earth. Here's what you need to understand. You need to understand that just because something is distant doesn't make it more holy. God is not distant, he is near. He's near in the basic things. In a few minutes, you're going to pick up a little plastic cup and a little piece of homemade bread that's delicious, but so basic. You're sitting next to a flawed person. This is where the wives nudge their husbands. You're sitting next to someone who's entirely unimpressive. You're looking at someone right now who is entirely unimpressive. If you don't know that yet, let's get it over with. I'm an idiot. Okay, there we go. The basic, thank you. I need that. The basic reality here is that God comes through the simple. But because something is simple does not mean it's profound or not profound. Just because something is earthy doesn't mean God is not in it. God is not working through it. It's why people throw out the Bible. They're like, it's got human authors in it. Isn't that amazing? God chose to speak through human authors. And there is human residue on it, but that doesn't tarnish it. Just because it comes in human voice doesn't mean that it is not divine. So one way to trip over Jesus is to see his familiarity, see his humanity, see his humility, see his earthiness, and go, he can't really be God. God's flashier than that. Well, keep looking. God has come into the world, and he did it through the humility of the incarnation. Verse 28, so Jesus proclaimed as he taught in the temple, you know me and you know where I come from. He's not denying that he comes from Nazareth. He's not ashamed of it. But I have not come of my own accord. In other words, that was God's idea. That was the Father's idea. He picked that out. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me. And by the way, I don't have a lot of time to say this, but Jesus could have defended himself here. All right, he goes, actually, guys, I was born in Bethlehem, and I am of the tribe of Judah, and I am from the lineage of David. He could have done all that. He's just not interested in doing that because he knows it's not going to make a difference. right? More information doesn't make unbelievers any less lost. Okay, he knows that. So he's just not going to defend himself. So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. Yet many of the people believed in him. Now here we see some belief, okay? In the milieu of all the different positions on Jesus, here's some believers. And they said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has? In other words, man, he's done more than enough for me to believe. I'm in. Okay, that's what some people are saying. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering. Okay, there's our word again. So the Pharisees, they hear the beehive of all the, you know what they're listening, the part that their ear is tuned to is the people going, man, why aren't the Pharisees confronting him? Are they cowards? Is he the Messiah? And they're like, uh-oh, we better act because we're people pleasers. So we better do what they want us to do. They hear the muttering. The chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. It's kind of funny when the officers show up, and then we'll see this next week where the officers are like, we were going to arrest him, but he was so impressive. It's awesome. Anyway, Jesus then said, I will be with you a little longer, and then I'm going to him who sent me. Now, let me just say this. Jesus is not talking here to believers. He's talking to the unbelievers, I'm pretty sure, here. You will seek me, and you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come. Now, this speaks a little bit, I think, to the timeline here and the importance of making a decision. Jesus is like, hey, you guys are muttering. Get your muttering done and figure out what you're doing, because at some point, I'm going to be gone. And the only way you're going to be able to interact with me is through the cross. And the cross is scandal. You think this is weird now? Just wait until you see the Messiah lifted up, crucified, humiliated, naked on a stake. So he's saying there's a time crunch here. Stop your murmuring. Figure this out. The Jews said to one another, verse 35, this is so funny. Where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? Dispersion, there's a thing called the diaspora. There's Jews that were scattered throughout all of the ancient world. And so they called it the diaspora Jews. And so they're saying, is he going to go off to Philippi and Thessalonica and Rome and start preaching to the Greeks? What's he doing here? What does he mean by saying you will seek me and you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come? Now, we're going to stop right there, but I got one more point to make here. Number 6 on your handout. Sixth way to trip over Jesus is to make the teaching of Jesus about upgrading your worldly station instead of uprooting you to a new location. Here's where I think they're so tripped up here. They're tripped up because they're pretty sure that Jerusalem is all that Jesus has got going on. If he's the Messiah, then there's nothing God is interested in beyond the greatness of Israel. And Jesus is actually like, I'm going somewhere else. I'm actually not trying to build this thing. And they might even remember that he said the temple was going to be destroyed. So he's kind of like trying to get them to connect the dots that he didn't come in to establish the greatness of Israel. He came in to establish an entirely new kingdom made up of entirely new people. And some of the people from Israel will come into that by faith. But he's here to make an entirely new thing happen, that if they want to come in, they're going to have to become expatriates of this domain that they currently inhabit and become rerouted in this new kingdom, in this new world. So the trap today, I'll just end here. I think the trap today is that I think many people look at the message of Jesus and they trip over it because they assume that the message of Jesus is about helping you to game life, right? Talk about this all the time. Like, this is so much of Christianity in the West. Hey, you want to have a better life? You want to have a better marriage? You want to have better parenting? You want to have a better job? You want to have a better everything? You want to have more health, wealth, prosperity, everything? You want to be well, healthy? Add some Jesus to your life. Couldn't hurt, right? Yeah, Joel, our boy, right? Yeah, man, he's got a great smile. You want to have a good life? Jesus will help you have a better life. Is that the message of Jesus? It's like completely the opposite. Now, sometimes our life gets better in certain ways, but a lot of times you just declared that you now belong to another kingdom and the one you live in now hates you. So now you're behind enemy lines. So that gets messy. And God's also trying to work salvation or sanctification in you, so that means you're going to go through some trials. Might be persecution. Things are going to get hard. If Christianity is adopted as a way to game your life, make it a little better, to elevate your joy, then you will walk away disappointed. Because when hard stuff comes, you will not be left treasuring Jesus. You will be left holding life, having dropped Jesus, and saying, actually, I think I'll stick with this world. It's so, guys, you have to get this now, because when suffering comes, it tests what you really love. Now, don't get me wrong. God loves to bless us, and he does. He's kind. He's generous. In a sense, he does want us to have a good life here. He just doesn't want us to love our life here because it's empty. He wants us to see our new identity, our forever trajectory in his eternal kingdom, which is why he came. He came to purchase and bring about the kingdom of God, God's eternal, forever world. Amen? So if you want to trip over Jesus, change his message to be something in regards to just elevating your life. All right, I'm going to end with some application for mutterers, and I'm one of them. Okay, let me just say this. When I say mutterers, I'm not just talking about unbelievers. I think there is a spirit of muttering that resides in all Christians. And I think it's this part of us that kind of like that rebellious teenage, sorry if you're a teenager, rebellious teenage part of us that's kind of like, yeah, like I'm good, Jesus. I mean, thanks for saving me. I'm in, but like I'm just going to mutter in the back. You know, I think that's the part of us that God's trying to wake up and call into sanctification this morning. So I got 4 just quick pieces of advice for mutterers. Number 1, say what you really think. Okay? One sign of mumbling is that you're not sure you really think what you're saying, right? So a lot of times we mumble when we say something we're not sure it's right, or we're not sure how it's going to land. Hey, do I look good in this? Yeah, you look good. You look great. You know, or hey, does this make me look fat? Yeah, no. What was that? You know, we mumble when we're unconfident or whatever it is, right? So I think what we really need to do, if you're in here and you're not sure about Jesus, or you're in here, I just want you to understand the first thing you need to do is just say what you really think, because Jesus already knows, and he wants to interact with you in reality so that he can save you and deal with the real condition of your heart. So number 1, say what you really think. Number 2, do not approach Jesus to validate your world. Do you know what I mean by that? So many people come to the Bible looking to validate their already adopted worldview. I think this way, I like this, I think this is right, I think it's that. Now I'm going to go to the Bible and I'm going to prove that my framework is accurate. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not how you read the Bible. You go to the Bible and go, okay, everything that is my operating system is entirely corrupted. Now, God, help me think. Help me think like Jesus. So don't approach Jesus to validate your world. Approach him to be transformed by his. You know, we are growing into our forever world, which means subsequently that we are growing out of this one, which means that the more you live here, Christian, the more uncomfortable you will be, because you don't belong here. I hate sin. I hate evil. I hate seeing my friends suffer from cancer and mental illness and abuse and evil and all of the things that we all hate. We are growing into God's world, and so therefore we need to be transformed to think like God's world now. That's why we're here. We're being prepared. Number 3, don't just talk about Jesus and or hear what people say about Jesus. Read the words of Jesus and talk directly to Jesus. Christians, read your Bible. Non-Christians, read the Bible. Look at what he said. Interact with it. It's fascinating. Trust me, I spend hours every week reading it. It's fascinating. It's life-changing. Number 4, when you interact with Jesus, this is important, don't look for what you like, look for what you need. Okay? Don't look for what you like, look for what you need. This is not a pep talk. It's a new identity. It's a new destiny. It's a new credit score. This is what the Bible comes telling us about. The Bible does not exist for us to go in and find the things we like and assimilate them into our life. The Bible comes to completely change our operating system and make us think completely differently. Salvation is not what you might look for when you're dead, but it's what you need, right? It's what you need. Bless you. Let's pray. God, I'm so thankful that you're a saving God, a rescuing God, a communicating God. I'm so thankful, Lord, that you have given us your word. You give us your son, Jesus, that we can know truth. And I pray, Lord, against my muttering, the muttering of my heart, Lord, the part of me that is so constantly still in rebellion. And so, Lord, I just pray as we come to the table, Lord, that you would meet us, God, in that space, and that we would interact and do work with you. In Jesus' name, amen.